Welcome to the 536th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Welcome, and thanks for listening. I hope your Thanksgiving was good. Ours was excellent. We went to a turkey trot. I was a spectator, recovering from our last 45K. I did do a 1 mile fun run with my grandson, along with everybody else. But Addie, our registered dietitian, did a 5K pushing both Caleb, who is 5, and Cece, who is almost 2, and a double bob, if you've not heard of those strollers, to the tune of about 111 pounds for a sub 30-minute finish, which was pretty good. It was the second bob stroller in, first double bob, so congratulations to Addie. We also had 3 of our practice members do a 5K, so I think that was pretty cool. And I got to observe, and I love people watching. I think it's a fabulous time to see people of all ages, especially coming out on a turkey trot to run a 5K. People that was one of our members, it was her first race ever, so she just didn't want to be last, and she wasn't, so it was fabulous, and it made her want to do another one. And that's really the key, is to get the bug. Because when you sign up for these races, just starting out with simple 5Ks, you get the bug to sign up for another one. And if you sign up for something, then you're most likely to train to do it, which leads to one thing leads to another. When I did my first marathon, I hadn't run any races ever in my entire life. And so I started with a 5K and then went to a 10K, then a half marathon, and then finally the marathon that spring. But, you can do 5Ks can be very, very challenging just to improve your speed. And it's all about what you can do for yourself and setting your own goals. It's not about everybody else. But when you're on the sidelines, you do get to observe. And what I observed as people age is that the stride length decreases, and there is the tendency to more of a plodding type of thing. And I recognize it in myself, doing slower, long distance running that, especially with some of these longer things, you're trying to conserve. You're old enough to try to protect yourself. You don't want to get injured, and you want to have some room, you want to have something left for the end, and you conserve, and you start training for long runs, and pretty soon you're just doing this little short stuff, short striding, plodding along at a certain pace, and you do lose speed, and you lose mobility over this thing, because, you're stiff after some long runs, and depending on what your mobility is, and therefore, but I got to tell you, watching the 5K, it spurred me to like, okay, enough of this, protect yourself. I've got to, do some more speed work, lengthen the stride. And so over the last week, that's actually what I've been doing. And it's a whole lot more fun to open up the stride length and do some faster running. I've had 2 running coaches in the last couple of years. I'm now self-coached again. Some may say I don't play well with others. I've been in private practice for over 25 years. But it's really hard for a coach that doesn't see you or are not with you to know exactly what's going on in your life, and how to plan for all the other things. And running was starting to become a little bit of a job for me with assignments, and so I decided that I would be better off without the assignments, and I would try to listen to my body more, because that's part of the reason of having a coach, is not to overtrain. And that was actually happening because of being prescribed runs for the goals that I wanted without knowing the rest of my life. So it becomes a little bit more complicated, but I've been running with joy over the last week, running with an open stride, running faster, and again, promising to do my mobility and listen to myself, and we'll see how it goes. But it's been, quite eye-opening, and I've learned a lot from both of the coaches, so it's not any discredit to them. I'll say it's not them, it's me. But I've learned a lot of different things and a lot of different ways to go about my own training. I got an email from a listener, and she asked if I would review the book Born to Walk and talk a little bit about walking, running, and thresholds and what heart rates we should obtain. And I haven't read the book Born to Walk. I probably won't read the book Born to Walk because I believe we were born to run and walk some of the time, but to do both because of that mobility. Now, my previous running coach would say, walk like you don't want to be passed, which is also a good thing. So learning good running form, and I've actually taken a 82-year-old member of the practice to a marathon race walking. So there's nothing wrong with walking. There's nothing wrong with race walking fast. It's when we start plodding and having poor form that I think the problems start to come in. And you can do that, obviously, with running or walking, as I just said. But over time, we tend, if we don't practice some of these faster paces, different paces, and mobility, we lose our mobility. We also lose neuromuscular connections from our brain to our muscles, so we lose reaction time. When we have stiffness, that's when people trip and fall. So people that have decreased hip mobility or ankle mobility, I see them falling a lot and breaking other things, and it becomes detrimental. So mobility is the key to having balance. Balance is another neuromuscular adaptation that we all need to practice all of the time. And it's amazing when you don't check it, you find that at what point did that go away? At what point could I not, touch the ground? What point could I not have my knees over my toes? At what point did my ankles start becoming not mobile? We just don't notice it because we do the activities that we do and we work around things, and we don't check in with ourselves enough to look at those different mobilities. And the turkey trot's a good way to kind of check in. I'm sure a lot of the people that, they were really trying and busting themselves to do the fastest race that they could. And, I'm sure it's very motivated. We've got to do this more. Kind of reminds me that, when we would go to the beach, it's like we should go to the beach more often. We live so close, but yet we don't. So the turkey trot's the same way. I'm sure a lot of people went home and said, we should do this more often. And I hope that they do, and I hope that it spurs people to sign up for more races. If you haven't signed up for a jingle and jog race, I would suggest that next. And then marathon training will be coming right around the corner because spring marathon training is starting to come. I am running a 50-mile race next weekend in Daytona. We're running down Highway A1A, so that should be interesting. And then I'll be taking, I will have no races until January the 18th when we'll do the long haul 100. So those are what I have in the upcoming weeks to get ready for. So hopefully this Daytona 50 will let me know where I am as far as my fitness goes, and we'll just keep plugging along. And, this 50-miler is also a training run for the 100-miler, so it all adds up over time. The good news is that when you lose muscle, which is called sarcopenia, or you lose mobility stiffness, it can be retrained. And there was actually an article recently in the Journal of Health and Aging that showed just that. You can retrain yourself to get range of motion. You can retrain yourself to get faster. How fast, how long, how short, it's kind of up to the individual. The fear, obviously, for everybody is injury. But anytime we move, anytime we get out of our chair, there's a risk of injury. There's always risk-reward in everything we do. And the downside of not moving is everything I've talked about, but yet there is a little bit of an risk of injury when we start to push a little bit. So that's when you start to listen to your body and to have recovery. And most training gurus and exercise physiologists and observation of Kenyans and people of all ages really look at endurance versus speed. And people say, well, which will I get fitter from or burn more calories from? And it really comes down to what you'll do most consistently. Some people like 5Ks, some people like marathons. So you need less endurance training for a 5K than you do a marathon. On the other hand, like I just said, if you don't ever do any speed work, you can become slower and lose form. So we all need a little bit of both. And it turns out that it's probably 80-20, 80% slow and 20% on the faster side of stuff, or less. There's a book by Steve Magness. It's called The Science of Running. It's a great book, and he's actually a great author. But he reviewed various exercise physiologists and running coaches over the years and their approach to Olympians. And it kind of, the information kind of stays the same. There's little nuances over time, but for the most part, we need to build an engine. We need to build endurance. And that's really the first part of training. And that's what we do in our practice when we help people, is we try to have people build endurance. You ought to be able to you ought to be able to go an hour without stopping. And I think that's a really good goal. No matter how slow you go, cover an hour. And then you start to work on, pushing that pace a little bit. But not every day, so every day shouldn't be a race, maybe 1 or 2 days a week that you do something different. And, some of those things are, mailbox to mailbox, just pickups, they're called striders. You pick up the pace and then you slow down the pace. You pick up the pace and you slow down the pace. And over time, those can help really build speed, but they also maintain form and help you to maintain mobility with running and not kind of get stuck into one cue. As we look at heart rate, there's a variety of different formulas. In medicine, we use 220 minus your age. In running, there are some that look at 180 minus your age. That gives you a maximum heart rate. Nobody really should be hitting their maximum heart rates. If you're hitting a maximum heart rate every time you run, that's probably not good for you. And if, I question whether it would be accurate or sustainable for the most part. If you go for a maximum heart rate, you're really going to be huffing and puffing a whole lot. Most training should be done around 70 to 75% of maximum heart rate. As you get more fit, you have more gears, you can go faster at lower heart rates, and you can start to feel when your heart rate is starting to get into that anaerobic phase. And a lot of it's conversational. So if you can, still carry on a conversation and run or walk fast, then you're really training where you need to be. If you haven't noticed anything and you're not breaking a sweat, you're probably not pushing things enough. But again, if you do it an hour, it's probably not too bad. Now, that does not count when you're stopping every 15 minutes to talk to the neighbor with your Yorkie, and, that's part of the hour. We're talking about an hour steady walking. So that's kind of what I would go for on most days. Obviously, listen to your body. If you feel tired, you might cut it short that day. When I have had a coach, they've always asked me, what day do you want to be your rest day? And I don't really like rest days. It's not really practical for me. I've got a full-time job. I'm always on the go. But I do better when I have a little bit of exercise that starts me off in the morning. So it doesn't have to be much and it doesn't have to be intense, but I don't really like the exercise. I think that at my age, in early 60s, but I think anybody over, if you're starting, especially over 50, I don't think we need rest days. I think there's more to lose on a rest day than there is to gain by resting. If you put somebody to bed, they lose muscle mass, they lose fitness. I don't think we have the time to waste on just not doing anything, sitting around for a day. So, a gentle walk, some mobility training, I think that's okay for a rest day. But I do think that there should be an activity that you move forward for a prolonged period of time every day to keep things going and preserve what you have. So, obviously if you're sick, if you're extremely tired, or, you got something that prohibits you from doing something, then that's one thing. But, often you can change it up. You could be on a bike one day, a swim one day. You could elliptical machine, something, but, a day that's maybe light, but yet have something on that day so that you're not completely going backwards on that one day that you kind of get out of the swing of things. The 3-day-a-week thing, I don't think is, there are some plans out there where you can, train for a marathon on 3 days a week if you run really hard. And so they're very intense training. And a lot of books will sell, 3 days a week or the bare minimum. But I think there's more to be gained by doing something every day, even if it's just getting in the habit of getting out and getting the morning sunlight, or getting out and doing something. You'll feel much better for it, and it keeps you in the habit, because sometimes one day can lead to 2 days that lead to, And if you are going to, you say, I really need a rest day, then pick that day, and that's your rest day. Make it a certain day of the week, not just, assign it randomly, because I think that leads to, again, every day is a rest day. People say, I walk every day. And you'll say, what, did you walk yesterday? Well, no, I didn't walk yesterday. Well, I didn't walk today. When's the last time you walked? And it's like, well, the last week. So we lose track of what we're actually doing if we, become so nonchalant with what our rest day is going to be. My opinion on vitamin D has changed radically over the last 10 years. The normal level for a 25-hydroxy vitamin D level in most labs in the United States is 30. I rarely see someone with a value of 30 that's not taking supplements. If you're out in the sun without sunscreen and sunglasses, you might be able to achieve it, depending on where you live, how close to the equator. But it is pretty difficult to get to that level of 30 without being outside significantly without those things. In Europe, the level of being normal is 50. The European Endocrine Society, it's 70. And this has come about. There was some studies done in Sweden looking at risk of venous thrombosis and pulmonary emboli in pregnant women that can carry a certain genetic abnormality that makes them at risk to clot. And what they found was that the women with that genetic abnormality that had low vitamin D levels had a much higher incidence of having deep venous thrombosis and pulmonary emboli. It's been fairly recent that Finland and Sweden have started to fortify their dairy products because of the low vitamin D levels, because of the latitude that people, there's just not as many days that the UV index is enough to get people's vitamin D levels up. So a lot of the food is supplemented, mainly the dairy is fortified with vitamin D. So too as it is in the United States. Depending on what kind of non-dairy milk you drink, you may not be getting supplemented with vitamin D if you're a plant-based person. So you have to kind of look at whether or not you're getting, vitamin D as far as the supplement, the food products that you're eating. The other thing that, absorption might be somewhat different. And again, how much are you actually getting outside? Vitamin D deficiency is not only being associated with increased risk of thrombosis, but also an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, an increased risk of autoimmune disease. They noted in Finland, those with low vitamin D levels, children had a higher level of type 1 diabetes. It's one of the things that led to increasing the fortification. Cholesterol is utilized to make vitamin D into the active form. So, one wonders how many people that have high cholesterol also have low vitamin D levels, and they're not actually, they could be actually using more of their cholesterol. We make cholesterol in our body, we don't need to eat it. But as we get older, we probably clear it less. And so it leads to the accumulation of cholesterol. And in the right setting, depositing into vessels and developing coronary artery disease. Again, it doesn't work in a vacuum, but the more cholesterol you have to do something with it. And if it's in your bloodstream, most likely you have a good chance of it getting into your blood vessels. If your vitamin D is low, it's not going to help clear it as much. So, that's another reason for making sure your vitamin D levels are adequate. With infections, flu, viral things, COVID, people that had a vitamin D level of 50 did much better. So we're recommending that all our patients or our members achieve a vitamin D level of at least 50. And as much with the sun as possible, because the sun also activates a lot of other chemical processes that go on in our skin besides the activation of vitamin D. So as much as you can get from the sun without sunscreen or sunglasses on, but make sure your levels are good. Again, not recommendations. I'm not giving you a free medical advice, but this is what we do in our practice. Vitamin D is also prevalent in fish. Salmon tends to have 800 to 900 international units of vitamin D. Farmed salmon, 200 to 500. Also more contaminants in farmed fish than wild-caught fish. And of course, contaminants is also a worry for fish consumption. I've talked about it over the years, that fish contains more dioxins and forever chemicals, perhaps, than plant-based sources. But turns out there was a fairly large study looking at ingestion and dietary patterns of people, both children and adults, and dioxin consumption from various foods. Dairy, by far, contains a significant amount of dioxins, about 11%. Meat, mixtures of meat, 46% of the dioxins that are consumed. Chicken, 77% of the dioxins consumed. Eggs, 3%. Fruits and vegetables, 9% of the dioxins consumed. Fish is another 10%. So when you look at it compared to everything else, it's fairly hard for us to get away from contaminants in the world we live in, but I don't think, as far as the risk versus benefit, that again, it's not enough to scare me away from fish. I also, start to look at the risk benefit of other things. So I have vitamin D, again, protein, and selenium, magnesium, manganese, B12. So there's other things that fish now offer me that I wasn't getting on a truly plant-based diet. I had a really good question in one of my office lectures this week, as far as, well, if I put fish back into my diet, what am I now missing from other plant-based nutrients? And I thought that was an excellent question, because I've talked about that before, is what, bang for your buck. If you have, 2,000 calories for the day, how do you get all the vitamins, nutrients, antioxidants that you need to get without going over your caloric needs? And so we went through it, looking at a day's worth of food consumption. I always make sure that I have my greens, nitric oxide producing greens. My other source of nitric oxide is the morning sun. UVA, or near-red radiation, near-red light, high in photons that help us to produce nitric oxide. So the greens in the diet, very important. So that I make sure that as a part of my diet regardless. That's number one. And I'm also looking for fiber. My fiber comes from breakfast chia, hemp seeds, fruit, whole grains that I eat, certainly beans that I eat, and other vegetables. If I were going to substitute fish for a meal, that typically I'm looking at the protein source. So my typical protein source in my plant-based diet is either beans or tofu. If I were going to substitute the fish for the beans, the caloric difference would be a little bit higher for fish versus the beans, because there is some saturated fat in the salmon. as well as low doses, but some cholesterol, but the portion size would be smaller. So given the calories that I need, my portion size of salmon is smaller than my portion size of beans would be. I would be losing the fiber from the beans, so that would have to come from my greens and other vegetables. I eat a pretty high fiber diet with, again, a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables, and whole grains. So, losing the 4 or 5 grams from the plant-based source on that day, it's not a tremendous amount. As far as nutrients, I talked about the nutrients that salmon gives over, let's say, beans, in the form of DHA versus beans would have some ALA or alpha-linolenic acid. So it's a matter of actually just being present and knowing what you're doing when you're changing some of these foods out. How I prepare the salmon would be important, or how I would prepare fish, or where I would get it. So if I were to eat out and it were to be cooked in butter, which I wouldn't do, that would increase the caloric density of it. People that, have fish cooked in oil or put, different sauces, that might change the content of the fat. So you have to be aware of that when it comes down to it. Research has shown that it doesn't drive your cholesterol. We'll see. In 3 months, we're repeating lipids and omega-3s on our members. Right now, there's significantly, I think we're like 30 people with that have had DHA levels that are low versus about 8 people that are okay to good. The really good range have been only a few, and those people are eating fish. So I don't have any plant-based person that doesn't supplement, and even those that have a high DHA level. So moderate, yes, but not high. So that's kind of where we are. When you look at, another good question I had this week was, well, why? I don't know if I buy this DHA thing. That was what was told. I feel like my brain's working okay. My brain may be working better than other people's brains. Do I really need it? The problem is, if we're vitamin or nutrient deficient, we really don't know that we're nutrient deficient till it has a secondary side effect and we have some sort of disease or illness that's associated with it, like cardiovascular disease with low vitamin D. So until you have it, you think things are okay. Like I said earlier, brain size has been associated with more DHA intake. 40 to 60% of our gray matter is DHA, where about 4% of the white matter in the brain is DHA. There are numerous studies that show people's brains shrink as they age. If your BMI is elevated, your brain shrinks more than if your BMI is normal. There have been associations with fish intake and a decreased cardiovascular risk, cancer risk, Alzheimer's risk. I also consider inflammation and inflammation-related diseases. We talk about, getting chia seeds and hemp seeds and flax seeds so that we push the omega-3s up and limit the omega-6, so limit the oils, limit the nuts, and, of course, animal sources to decrease the omega-6s so that ratio is better. Because there's so many more omega-6 available in foods than omega-3s. So when we're looking for things that lead to anti-inflammation and anti-clotting, we're looking at omega-3s. So again, adding the DHA in would be a plus, especially in the presence of not having that big a conversion from alpha-linolenic acid to DHA. There's also been actually several studies that looked at the risk of atrial fibrillation. The question is, does omega-3s decrease your risk of atrial fibrillation, which is the most common atrial arrhythmia that there is? Turns out that alpha-linolenic acid, so plant source of alpha-linolenic acid, does not decrease the risk of or the incidence of atrial fibrillation. However, DHA, not EPA, but DHA intake in the form, which be associated with intake of fish, actually decreases the incidence of atrial fibrillation in multiple studies, including a Finnish study that was a prospective study looking at fish intake and incidence of atrial fibrillation over a 17-year period. So to me, that drives it home even more. Again, I don't want my brain to shrink. I don't want atrial fibrillation if I can avoid it. Runners and athletes probably are at a little bit increased risk of atrial fibrillation. So if I can decrease my risk in some way, then that would be another reason to do it. There's a lot of talk out there about grass-fed things, grass-fed butter, grass-fed beef being so healthy. The reality of it is, it's just like the cereal boxes or other things that people try to sell you. They're high in omega-3. They're touted as being high in omega fatty acids. But again, we know that omega-3s and omega-6s are different. Omega-6s going to more inflammatory compounds, more clotting compounds, and beef and dairy tend to be much higher in omega-6s than omega-3s. So there's minimal amounts of DHA coming from those foods. And if you're plant-based, you're not getting them anyway. And they're not fortified in plant oils. So there you have it. If you don't want to eat fish, fine. But I think, supplementing in the form of algae, if you're plant-based, is probably the best way to go. You have to make sure of contaminants. We don't know, even though it might say 400 milligrams or 500 milligrams. We don't know for sure. It's not regulated. We don't know for sure in the fish either. So it would be prudent to have levels checked if you start to supplement. And it depends on what your levels are. But I would recommend having your omega-3 profiles done if you haven't had that done. I think it's becoming a little bit more widespread for people to have the levels checked. I think some people just supplement and they really don't know where they are. Again, you have to make sure if you're supplementing that there's not some sort of carcinogen or other contaminant in the supplement. And when things just give you the carte blanche omegas, beware of what you're actually getting. So to summarize, exercise and how much we should do and how much we should target our heart rates. I think exercise, get your time up, be conversational most of the time, maintain your mobility, and be consistent is the best thing you can possibly do. And then when you want to dial things in, then you start to add a little bit of extra in on a basis. I still like that calendar concept where you just write down on a simple calendar what you did on a daily basis so you can look back over the years and see what you've done. It's amazing when I look back on these calendars as the years go by of what I think I did and what I actually did. I don't remember verbatim, but I like looking. I have the Long Haul 100 coming up in January, so I look back to see where my training was. It gives you a good idea what your fitness was and what you were actually doing. Are you the same? Have you declined? What was your regimen? And then if you have an injury, you can look back and what led to it. I know that if I try to increase my speed and volume at the same time, I'm more likely to get injured. If I try to increase my speed when, I'm tight and my mobility's down after a race, I'm likely to get injured. If I don't do my mobility work, I'm likely to get injured. It's not because moving causes injury, it's just that you need to take care of yourself as an athlete of any age to prevent injury. So, I'm a little bit more cognizant now of doing a pre-run little bit of mobility and getting loosened up as opposed to just running out the door and hoping I loosen up in the first mile. So I hope some of that helped. As always, I'd like to hear from you. You can email me at jami@drdulany.com, jami@drdulany.com. Check out our website, drdulany.com. It's all spelled out so that you can see how you can become a member and benefit from our nutrition lectures, our cooking demos, our mobility classes. No matter where you are, we Zoom them. We put them up on our members-only website. and we personalize your care. We don't treat them and street them. I've had people come to me lately where they just given a bunch of medicines, take this, nutrition doesn't work, don't talk to us. That's not how we roll here. We want to make everybody's health span and lifespan as long as possible, with as minimal medicines as possible, and to entertain questions. I love questions. I love being challenged, and I love that about some of our classes. So if you're looking for a doctor that is not going to run away from questions and actually is not going to run out the room and after they write a prescription, look no further. Give us a call in the new year. Give us a call anytime. Thanks as always for listening.